All right, we're going to begin in 1 minute. Council, ensure that your microphones are turned on and cell phones are turned off or switched to silent.
Mine's at home. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
After.
Dustin, we're live.
Awesome, thank you. All right, today's January 10th, 2022. This is going to be a regular legislative meeting for the the Barberton City Council. Before we begin our meeting today, we're going to go into committee report, or the committee meetings. I want to remind everybody that the use of personal devices behind the gates and council is prohibited per the council rules, and that only active committee members for an active session in the committee is required to be sitting. So if you do get up outside of your committee meeting, just be respectful when you leave and re-enter. All right, we're going to start with city properties, parks, and recreation with Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. City Properties and Parks and Recreation meeting today, January 10th, 2022 at 6:01 at City Council Chambers. All members are present and other guests noted, and also other council members. We have two request legislation. The first one is legislation requested by Stacy Carr for the mayor to enter into contract to accept a vacant lot at 236 14th Street Northwest, parcel 01-01.04422 as a donation to be included in the Barberton Land Bank lots. Emergency wording requested. Any remarks?
No.
Can I get a motion for this, please?
I'll make a motion for that.
I'll second it.
All right. And motion was that passed. Can I get a vote, please?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Second legislation request by Stacy Carr for the mayor to enter a contract to accept the vacant lot at 71 West Houston Avenue, parcel 01.12277 as a donation to be included in the Barberton Land Bank lots. Emergency wording requested, please. Any remarks? All right, motion for that, please.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
Can I get a vote, please?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed. No new pending legislation, and opening this up for miscellaneous discussion. Council? Seeing none, motion to adjourn, please.
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second it.
Thank you. And we are adjourned at 6:04. With that, I pass, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jaber. Next up is public welfare and safety with Mrs. Fry.
Thank you. Larry.
Oh, thank you.
That's my brother.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. The date is January 10th. It is Monday. The time is 6:04 p.m. and we are in council chambers, and I am going to bring the Public Welfare and Safety Committee meeting to order. All members of my committee are present. The committee consists of me, Mr. Shorter Griffin, and Joyce Coburn. All council members are also present, as well as guests as noted on my agenda sheet. Tonight, we have some pending legislation, which is a letter from Mrs. Miller, our law director, to enter into contract with the Law Department Defender's Office of Summit County. And this is an ordinance authorizing the law director to enter into a one-year contract with the Legal Defender's Office of Summit County to provide legal representation to indigent persons in the amount of $170 per case and declaring an emergency. We also have one other piece of pending legislation, and this is to adopt the AFSCME agreement. And this is an ordinance of the Council of the City of Barberton to adopt and approve the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Barberton and AFSCME Local Number 265 and declaring an emergency. Then we have one new piece of legislation that was presented by Mrs. Lisa Kolish-Miller, the law director, requesting legislation for the city to enter into a one-year contract with Oriana House for the 2022 Community Corrections Contract. Emergency wording has been requested. Did everyone on the committee get a copy of the agreement? Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the agreement? Mr. Griffin?
Yeah, Mrs. Fry, on these, is this something that's recurring every year, like the indigent people?
Yes,
It's
yes.
something that we do all the
Yes, we
time?
usually have a contract with them
Okay.
every year. Yes. Anybody else have any questions?
Is this the same, number one and number?
Yes, that's why
Okay, okay,
that's why I
thank you.
did what I did, because it is the same.
And we've already,
Yeah, we already voted that out last
Okay.
week. Yeah.
thank you.
So do I have a motion to call for this piece of legislation?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin
I'll second
and
it.
seconded by Mrs. Coburn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the other two pieces of legislation have already been taken out of committee, and we'll be voting on them this evening. Does anyone have anything for miscellaneous discussion regarding safety and public welfare? No, hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by Mrs. Coburn and seconded
second.
by Mr. Griffin. And we are adjourned at 6:07 PM.
Next up is Rules Marketing Development with Mr. Griffin.
Rules, Marketing, and Development. I would like to call this meeting to order today, January 10th. We are meeting in council chambers, all members present and all others as noted. Tonight, we have no requests for legislation. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion here from the board or anyone in the gallery for rules? Hearing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
And I will second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We adjourn at 6:08. Thank you.
Mr. Griffin. Next up is City Utilities with Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. Huddy. You're shocking. Thank you, Mr. President. It's January,
10.
yeah, my paper says the 4th.
Oh, okay.
It's January 10th, 2022. City Utilities will be called to order in the council chambers. All members are present and other council members and guests as noted. We have one request for legislation. It's a legislation request to authorize the Director of Public Service to advertise for bids and services used in ordinary and daily operations of municipal departments in the city of Barberton for 2022. We're requesting emergency wording, and this was called for last week and will be on the agenda for voting tonight. It was called for in another committee because utilities did not meet. It was in streets. So I need a motion to call for this in our committee.
Yes.
Do I have?
Deferred, correct? Or was it the wrong committee?
No, it's for both of us. It's from
Right,
both of us.
I'll make a motion to call for it.
And as we are missing Ward 1, I will second that. All in favor?
Aye.
That passes. Our next request for legislation is from Todd Shreve, interim Director of Public Service, to authorize the mayor or his designee to execute a memorandum of agreement, MOA, with Summit Soil and Water Conservation District for watershed service to provide conservation, technical, and educational assistance, inspections of stream channels, and whatever that area is, development and implementation of protocols to manage stream maintenance, create and amend the non-point source implementation strategy, NPS-IS plan, and collection of technical data that corresponds to the city's watershed goals. Emergency wording is requested, and if we have questions, we will defer to Mr. Shreve. Does anyone have any questions?
No.
Anyone? We've been working towards this for a while, so do I have a motion to call for it, Carol?
I'll make a motion to
Fry?
call for it.
Motion was made by Carol Fry, and I will second it, seconded by Joyce Coburn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Our next request for legislation was also from Todd Shreve, Interim Service Director, to authorize the mayor to enter into a professional services contract with Environmental Design Group for engineering and design services for the identified opportunity for an oxbow wetland with in-grade structures. The cost is not to exceed $54,810, and we're requesting emergency wording. Again, we will defer questions to Mr. Shreve. Are there any questions?
He sent an explanation today that was very, informative, so we're good.
Okay.
I am.
Yes. I'm-
The oxbow, that's the land we were discussing on how they create a wetland area to catch and help prevent flooding in this
South Barberton.
South Barberton. Okay. Do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make a
Mrs.
motion to
Fry?
call for this.
And I, Joyce Coburn, will second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We will be voting on these tonight, I believe, on both of those. And then we have one other pending legislation, which was what I brought up earlier. That's what was the streets and utilities equipment, supplies. Is there any miscellaneous discussion for utilities?
No.
Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion was made by Carol Fry and seconded by myself, Joyce Coburn, and we are adjourned at 6:14.
Thank you, Mrs. Colburn. Next up is Finance and Personnel with Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance and Personnel is meeting today, January 10th, 2022, at 6:14. We are in council chambers. All members of the committee are present, which include Councilors Coburn and Thompson, President Greer, and myself as the chairman. All other council members are present, plus guests noted. For topics of discussion, we have a couple of requests for legislation. The first one is from Mayor Judge. Legislation requested to pay invoices to Ruetzel for services rendered, but the PO was entered after the invoice dates. Emergency wording is requested. It's actually 4 separate invoices, and they are for 4 different months having to do with economic development, including work on the Cox Powell Herald Building Development, inside information on the American Rescue Plan Act funding, ARPA state demolition and brownfield grant programs, and the Truson Farms housing development, along with several other projects. Are there any questions on this?
I have none.
Any from the body, gallery? Hearing none, do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I will second.
Thank you. Those in favor?
Aye.
Passes. The second request for legislation, this again from Mayor Judge, legislation requesting to appropriate $411,200 from the unappropriated item of the American Rescue Plan Grant Fund to the capital budget of the American Rescue Plan Grant Fund as detailed on the attached request. First off, did everybody get the request? All right. The request does entail $260,000 for a new ambulance. It also includes features to help the COVID virus if a COVID positive patient has been treated in the back of the ambulance. $137,000 for the build out of Fire Station 1 to help minimize the risk of spreading the COVID virus. $14,200 for equipment purchase and installation at the Active Adult Center, allowing Barberton City Council and other city boards and commissions to meet at the center, allowing for social distancing. I did correspond back and forth with the mayor on this. The $137,000, there is a grant that we've applied for but have not received back yet. If approved, it could possibly be 90%, and thus we would probably be able to use the permanent capital improvement levy that's on the property taxes.
No, excuse me, sir.
Am I reading that wrong there?
We applied for a grant that could pay 90% for a different piece of equipment.
Okay, I'm reading this wrong here then.
Yeah, so we want to, if we get a grant, we get this grant for this other piece of equipment, we would need some matching funds, and so I want to hold on to the fire capital levy funds for that piece of equipment. But if that grant doesn't come through, there may be an opportunity to use other funding with the ARPA funds.
Okay?
Mr. Heidi?
Yes,
All right,
Counselor.
You said 137,000, and then the ambulance was mentioned. Is this
It's
90% grant for
$260,000.
the 260,000, or it's for the
For
137?
something totally separate.
Yeah.
They're totally
It's not-
separate, right, but which one were
It's
you
not-
just
It has
discussing?
nothing to do with this.
Oh,
paper.
separate from all of this? Okay. That's what I wanted to clear up.
And as far as the $14,200, the equipment that would be purchased and installed would be permanent, so that it could be used for the council, boards, commissions, and any other public meetings. The mayor does have a list of the equipment necessary. Before we go any further, the mayor also requested that this particular piece of legislation is, instead of what it says, is to be not in excess of the amounts. That way, if there is other funding available, we can use that, and we're not beholden straight to that. Is that correct, Mayor?
Yes. I would like the language to say not to exceed those dollar amounts. So if there is other funding, outside funding that we could leverage, then we're not held to what is passed, but we can't go over that amount. And then obviously, if this is passed, $137,000 for the build-out and other funding we can use down the road to leverage it, then I would obviously report that back to council, what those changes are.
All right, so
So we're amending the wording on the floor?
Yes, in the committee, just to make sure
Okay.
there. So do I have a motion for the committee to amend to say not to exceed?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now that that business is out of the way, are there any questions on these items? Counselor Angeloff?
Thank you, Mr. Heidig. The build-out of Fire Station 1, where will that build-out be? Are you losing some of the parking lot?
No, so currently, all of the officers sleep in one big open area. So this would build this out to give individual rooms. If you've been to Fire Station 2, they all have individual rooms. So it would have individual rooms to keep everyone safe, instead of sleeping in a big wide open area
That's over
at
here.
Fire Station
Okay.
1. Then you need separate HVAC systems and all that.
Okay, so that room, the big room, has all the beds, you're going to divide that out?
Correct.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from the body? From the gallery? Hearing none, do I have a motion to call for this?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
You asked, I'm going to tell you. The equipment that we are looking at purchasing, wireless microphones, computer operating system, backup battery charger, and then tennis splitter. So those are the things that we'll be buying with the $14,200, and that includes install. And then, as Councilman Heidig said, that will be used at a moment's notice if we need to change venues. That'll already be set up. So for city council, any boards or commissions, or any other public meetings, we've held a number of them down there in the past. Plus the Parks Department can use that. So they've already got a system down there, a sound system. This will be able to be integrated with that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, so do I have a motion to call for this piece?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. In favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes. For pending legislation, we have ordinance 2-2022 presented by Counselor Fry and myself. Excuse me. Enter into contract Law Department Defender's Office of Summit County, an ordinance authorizing the law director to enter into a one-year contract with the Legal Defender's Office of Summit County to provide legal representation to indigent persons in the amount of $170 per case and declaring an emergency.
Indigent, not
I
indignant.
have a very hard time pronouncing that word. I don't mind admitting that. It's one of those I see and I know it and I can't pronounce it right.
Okay. We just want it clear on the record.
So I know some people can't say the town Ashtabula, and certain words I can't say either. So, are there any remarks on this? I think it was pretty clear last week.
Yep.
Moving on. Ordinance number 3-2022, presented by Counselor Fry and myself, adopting the Ask Me Agreement and an ordinance of the Council of the City of Barberton, adopting and approving the collective bargaining agreement with the City of Barberton and Ask Me Local 265, and declaring an emergency. Any comments on that? From the gallery? That is all we have there for miscellaneous discussion. Anything from the committee? From the body? And from the gallery? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. We are adjourned at 6:24.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. That concludes our council meetings for this evening. We're going to take a short 2-minute break and come back for the legislative meeting.
Yeah. and then-
I got all confused on this one.
Well, I'm
She's good at that.
See words on paper and
All the time. All the time.
sharper.
Memorandum.
Tonight is
Oh, yeah.
Tonight
You
is-
look at it, and you can't,
voting night, right?
that's just like,
Yeah, legislative.
that's another.
Next
I
week
mean,
is
I look at it,
report.
it's like I'm.
And everything I have to report on will
I've
be
heard
done
it said a million times.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
and it
that's
just
how it
doesn't-
works
It
when
doesn't,
you're on the
there's something
island.
wrong with it.
Yeah.
As soon as that came in front of me, I was like,
I am,
Well,
You look at it, you know you can't say it, you look
I
at it.
know,
yeah,
I know it, yeah.
I've been here 2 weeks.
2 terms.
I've been here 2 weeks this year.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but you may have never been on committees, that's why.
Oh, yeah.
How you doing, sir?
It's always
for the draft, yeah.
Always good to see you, always.
It's always better.
My,
if
my,
it's-
my brain was thinking I could go ahead and turn in my notes.
That's what I was thinking too, but, yeah. But I better not.
Because I
yeah.
won't need them
Right.
tonight.
Oh, yeah, everybody's
She
got,
would
yo,
come back
just a
to
few
me
words that just
before
trip them up. I
Yeah,
just
You
thought
know,
that,
so I
as
can-
soon as I saw that on my sheet, I just went,
I worked my,
So,
you want me to give her yours?
yeah, so that's what I
Guy,
was
yellow, and the guy's already told me, he couldn't sell aluminum. And they always tell me, we set him up. And he left aluminum. We set him up. We set him up. Where's the ladder? Which one does it?
I know ones that I look at and I'm like, I gotta know a better word for it. No, I just run through my head and find something else and it's like, I see that and I gotta read it verbatim. It's
You
like,
know that,
right.
Thomas, that silver stuff you use in the kitchen all the time that holds heat in? Can't pronounce it.
I can't either.
Like I said, as soon as I saw it on the paper, I went,
Yeah, I can't say that word.
I can't either.
if I can't pronounce a word, I'll think of a different word to use that means the same
Yeah.
thing.
Just
But when I have to,
didn't, it wasn't a good one.
but when I have to read it verbatim, it's like, great.
But I couldn't pronounce that other word.
Poor people.
Yeah, you had one too.
all right, we're gonna begin here.
She gave us a new paper for that.
This is a regular legislative meeting of Barberton City Council. Today's Monday, January 10th, 2022. It is 6:27 PM. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by invocation by myself.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we start our meetings tonight, be a beacon of light and show us the way to serve our community and make the best decisions, and continue to provide solutions as representatives and as people. We understand the need for order, and we also understand the need for diversity. Grant us a stable platform so we can succeed together. Bless our troops, first responders, and continue to look over our community in these crazy times. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Mrs. Thompson. Here. Mr. Heidick.
Here.
Mrs. Angela.
Here.
Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mr. Jaber.
Here.
Mrs. Coburn.
Present.
Mrs. Fry.
Here.
Thank you, Clerk. Approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, December 20th, 2021, as presented. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, December 20th, 2021, as presented.
And Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion on approval.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, December 20th, 2021, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Approval of the minutes of the organizational meeting held on Monday, January 3rd, 2022, as presented. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the organizational meeting held on Monday, January 3rd, 2022, as presented.
Thank you. And Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to approve the minutes of the organizational meeting held on Monday, January 3rd, 2022, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Approval of the minutes of the executive session held on Monday, January 3rd, 2022, as presented. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the executive session held on Monday, January 3rd, 2022, as presented.
Thank you. And Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion to approve.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to approve the minutes of the executive session held on Monday, January 3rd, 2022, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Minutes are adopted. I'm having troubles with that word. Petitions and claims.
We don't have any.
Matters requested.
They've all been distributed.
Citizens addressing council.
None.
Thank you. First reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 1-2022, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, 2022 Residential Demolition Program. Enter into contract, Butcher and Son. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into contract with Butcher and Son Excavating Incorporated, the lowest and/or best bidder for the 2022 residential demolition program for the demolition of residential structures using CDBG general fund grant funding and/or general fund and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Angela?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to suspend.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mrs. Angeloff to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 1-2022.
Thank you. And Mrs. Angela?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mrs. Angeloff to adopt ordinance number 1-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Ordinance number 2-2022, presented by Mrs. Fry and Mr. Heidick. Title, enter into contract. Law Department Defender's Office of Summit County. An ordinance authorizing the law director to enter into a one-year contract with the Legal Defender's Office of Summit County to provide legal representation to indigent persons in the amount of $170 per case and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I motion that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Heidick's motion to suspend.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick, seconded by Mrs. Fry, to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I motion for the adoption of ordinance number 2-2022.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Heidick's motion to adopt ordinance number 2-2022.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 2-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Ordinance number 3-2022, presented by Mrs. Frye and Mr. Heidick. Title: Adopting the AFSCME AFSCME Agreement. An ordinance of the Council of the City of Barberton adopting and approving the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Barberton and AFSCME Local 265 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Heidick's motion to suspend.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 3-2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Fry?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mr. Heidick's motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 3-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Ordinance 4-2022, presented by Mrs. Angela. Title: Barberton Complete Streets Policy. Resolution. A resolution of the Council of the City of Barberton to enact a Barberton Complete Streets Policy to create a livable, complete, and walkable street to aid the City of Barberton personnel in the development, implementation, and future use of livable, complete, and walkable streets for the future City of Barberton construction projects within the public right-of-way. This will go for a second reading.
Thank you.
Ordinance number 5-2022, presented by Mrs. Angeloff and Mrs. Coburn. Title: 2022 Bids and Contracts, Years Requirements for Materials and Services, and ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service or the Director of Public Safety to advertise for bids and/or to enter into contracts in 2022 covering the year's requirements for materials and services used in the ordinary and daily operation of the municipal departments in the City of Barberton and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Angeloff.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 5-2022 be adopted.
Thank you. And Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt resolution number 5-2022. Are there any remarks? Good. Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Frye.
Yes.
This ends the first reading.
Second reading of ordinances and resolutions.
We have none.
Third reading of ordinances. Yes.
Were we not voting on the two in utilities until?
They will go to committee of the whole next week and be voted on at the following legislature.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Third readings of ordinances and resolutions.
We have none.
Thank you. Appointments.
We have none.
Miscellaneous and unfinished business.
We have 2 liquor license. We have a new liquor license, a C new, to Barberton Burgers LLC at 75 5th Street Southeast in Barberton. No objections were received, and we will return it as approved. And secondly, we have a transfer, which is it's a C liquor license. And, okay, AYALA, Restaurant LLC. Doing business as Casa del Ranchero on Tusk over here for the basement, the first floor and the basement. And it's from Casa del Ranchero Incorporated at the same address. And we received no objections and it will be deemed approved.
Thank you. Communications from the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just as we continue through this week, I just want everyone to be mindful of the temperature outside. You know, it's basically mid-January, and the freezing temperatures are, long-lasting freezing temperatures are starting to come in, and we're going to see a roller coaster here over the next few weeks, I think, of temperatures. And tomorrow morning, I think, is supposed to be in the single digits. So just be mindful of the temperatures. It's still dark out. Kids walking to school, people walking to work. Be mindful of anyone in your neighborhood who may need heat or other resources. If they do, please contact my office so we can put them in touch with the right organizations. Last week we held the annual New Year's Eve party for the active adults members. I do want to thank my staff who volunteered their time, but also the Parks Department, Mr. Patterson, Tammy and Kara, who also donated their time, and it was a great turnout, and had some of the active adult members out there dancing. So it was a good time had by all there. Did meet with Councilman Jaber today at several locations in his ward. We'll plan on doing it again this summer, in the springtime when it gets a little warmer out. So if any council members want to meet, let me know. I know a few council members took me up on this last year, and we went around the ward and looked at different items. Today, mostly, it was on property maintenance violations, and one of our inspectors met us out on site for a few of the visits, and so we'll be moving forward on that. Still working on the 22 budget. I have some meetings scheduled this week and next week as well, and then hope to wrap it up by the end of next week. But no promises, but that's the goal. And then finally, Change for Change is on January 28th at Angie's Italian Restaurant, benefiting Girls on the Run program, which is a program in our schools, middle school and high school age. So that'll be from 4:30 to 7 p.m. at Angie's Restaurant, benefiting Girls on the Run. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there anything else from the body? All right. With nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn? Oh, sorry.
Before the meeting this evening, ASME Union President Ray Lawson contacted me, and he wanted me to send his apologies for not being here. There's a large water main break, but he also wanted me to thank you for your time and consideration of the contract. And I also wanted to mention, I think it was last Monday, that James did the presentation, and that was because, just in case you were curious, we have 4 union contracts that have to be negotiated, and this year, police and fire overlapped with ASME. So she handled that negotiation, and I just would like to give her a shout out, that she did a great job with that. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mrs. Ferry. All right. Is there anything else from the body? I have one thing. We still are accepting applications for Ward 1 seat, and that'll go until the 14th. After the 14th, that is it. We have 2 applications. Is that?
4 PM on the 14th. I gave the wrong time last week.
Okay. Correction for the time last week, it is 4 PM on the 14th is the deadline to submit applications for the vacancy of Ward 1. We currently do have 2 applications. I'll make sure that all council members receive those ahead of time. With nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Hardick
Thank you, Mr. President. I motion to adjourn this meeting.
and Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Mr. Heidick's motion to adjourn.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Hardick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The meeting is adjourned at 6:45 PM.